Hello and welcome to the Discover Reading podcast. We have a fascinating and heartwarming episode for you today. Ahead of her Christmas children's lecture, our postdoctoral researcher, Dr. Vicky Boult, spoke to us about her work in elephant conservation. We spoke to Vicky about finding more humane ways of controlling elephant numbers in areas where they're coming into conflict with human societies, and also about her using meteorological data to predict extreme weather conditions and then intervene to protect elephants before those events take place. And most importantly, Vicky tells us about elephants' famous long memories and how much joy she gets from working directly with these incredible creatures. Enjoy. Great, fantastic then. So first off, if you could just kick things off, Vicky, and tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, great. So I'm a research scientist here at the University of Reading, based in the Department of Meteorology. But I've actually got a background in ecology and conservation. I've studied elephants for 8 years now. Started studying elephants for my undergraduate degree, and then got back into them when I did my PhD here at the University of Reading. And what I'm working on now in the Department of Meteorology is really using weather and climate forecasts to anticipate conservation outcomes and things we might be interested in for the conservation of wildlife.
Excellent. And as you said, you're an absolute expert in elephants. And we did notice, Vicky, that you've got a current project modelling elephants' behaviour. Can you please explain this and also what you learnt about these majestic creatures too?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been studying elephants for a long time, and one of the projects was trying to understand how the movement and the number of elephants changes in response to food availability. So this was a study based in southern Kenya in an ecosystem called Amboseli. And in Amboseli, there's very strong seasons. So you have a very strong dry season where there's not a lot of rainfall and the vegetation is very low and sparse. And then you have a wet season where the rains come, vegetation responds very quickly. And that means there's lots of food available for elephants. So we're interested how that influences where elephants go and when they choose to move from one place to another. And we found that the seasons were an important driver of elephant movement. When it was the dry season, they were very concentrated around water sources and food that was nearby water sources. And then in the wet season, they were able to move much more broadly in the ecosystem. So that was really interesting. But maybe what was even more interesting was actually that it wasn't just the availability of food that was important. There were lots of other things going on in elephants' lives, which are important too. So we saw that a couple of our elephants actually had babies in that time. And when they had babies, they didn't move very far, because obviously you've got a little one in tow, they've got little legs, can't move very fast. So they didn't go very far when they had youngsters. And they also chose to come back to the national park. And we think that's because that's sort of an area that they know that's safe for them. So it was really interesting also to see that it wasn't just food availability, but other things that elephants are considering when they're moving around the ecosystem as well.
I like that their movements tell a story with their little ones, and like just looking at where they went and why. Actually, there's you can see the sort of motivations behind that. It's really interesting. One thing I was thinking is you're talking about how they fit into the ecosystem, and my understanding is that ecosystems are all interlinked, and it's really key for all the different aspects to be in place, and they all kind of feed off each other in certain ways. I wonder where elephants kind of fit within their ecosystems. Do they play a really, really important role within that?
Yeah, certainly. So we would refer to elephants as a keystone species, which means that they not just live in an ecosystem, but they're also important for the workings of that ecosystem, I would say. So elephants, particularly their feeding behaviour, can be quite destructive. So they feed on trees and grasses, but when they're feeding on trees, they might pull off whole branches, they might strip the bark, and they can even push trees over and dig up the roots because they like to feed on the roots as well. And that process of feeding on trees like that means that they can really sculpt the landscape. So if you have lots of elephants feeding in an area for a prolonged period of time, we can see that that ecosystem moves from more woodland to maybe more grassland. And what would happen naturally is the elephants would do that process of moving an area to a more grass-dominated state, and then they'd move on to somewhere where there was more trees that they could feed on, do the same there, but then the previous area would recover and you'd see the trees coming back when the elephants have moved off elsewhere. So you see this real matrix of grassland and woodland, which is really managed and driven by the movement of elephants. So we certainly consider them to be ecosystem engineers or keystone species.
Wow, so fascinating, the fact that they're both driving the ecosystem, but also their behaviour is quite reliant upon ecosystems. Because from a layman's perspective, when we compare, say, people in one country to another, we are quite hot upon the fact that, for example, people in hotter countries are going to act differently to people in colder countries and understand the difference. So I guess my question is based upon that. But first of all, where are the major elephant bases? Is it generally just in Asia and Africa? And do you think you could expect differences in behaviour, therefore, between, say, Asian elephants and those elephants based in Africa?
Yeah, so we do have those two hubs, the African and the Asian groups of elephants. My study has always been on African elephants, but there's a huge number of similarities between African and Asian elephants in terms of long lifespans and good memories and the sort of family social unit that's so important to elephant society. There are some differences as well, and actually within Africa there's two species of elephants, and this is quite new research actually that now distinguishes two different species. So we have the savanna or bush elephant, and then we have the forest elephant in Africa as well. And the forest elephants live much more in sort of central and western Africa, where it's very dense sort of rainforest environments, and in those landscapes we actually see what the elephants are feeding on is a bit different. So they're feeding much more on things like fruit than just on trees and bark like their savanna relatives. But we also see the family units are a little bit different as well. So because the habitat they're in is so dense, they can't really live in very big family groups. So we see that forest elephants live in these much smaller units of, you know, a mother, maybe a couple of adult females and their offspring, whereas in the savanna elephants we see there's 10, 15 adult females and then their offspring as well. So we see a difference in that social group size as well. That's not to say the forest elephants aren't as social. These small units come together in these openings in the forest that are called bys. And they come together there, and that's where they do all their socializing, meet up with friends and potential mates as well. And that's a really important source of social life for forest elephants there. But lots and lots of similarities across all three of those, the African species and the Asian species, but also see some small differences, I guess, imposed really by the sort of habitats that they're living in.
Me and Chris did want to ask you a question about the long memory of elephants. Obviously, there's that saying of elephant never forgets, and you kind of mentioned that. So is that true? And how do we that they've got long memories?
Yeah, so elephants do have really, really good memories, ecological memories, what's going on in the ecosystem, where they can find good food, where they can find good water, where they can retreat in times of danger when things are threatening them. They also have really good social memories, so they know who's who in other family groups. They know who they get on well with and maybe who they don't. And all of that knowledge is really acquired over the lifespan of an elephant. So we see that the oldest individuals in elephant society, the females and the males, are really important sources of this information. They're like repositories of information. One way that plays out would be, as an example, family groups, so the female family units that have a very old female as part of that group, they're actually better. They have more success in raising their offspring. So their offspring are less likely to die or to get lost or injured when they're very young, because they have that old individual that really knows about where's safe for that little one, how best, as a family unit, how best can we raise that little one and keep it safe while it grows up. So those oldest individuals are important in elephant society, the males and the females, pass that information on throughout their lifespan to their offspring and their in the males, not their offspring necessarily, but their companions that they spend lots of time with. And that's really important, you know, for the resilience of an elephant population, having that knowledge. What do we do when there's a drought? What do we do when there's poaching happening? Where do we go? Where are we safe? They do have a good memory. It's super important for their survival.
And just based upon what you were saying, sometimes when you look at our leadership in humanity, it seems like it's lacking in wisdom. But from everything which you've been saying about elephants, it seems that although at points certain humans might view themselves as being superior, it almost looks like that elephants actually within their ecosystem have that wisdom in abundance. And one thing which I was listening quite recently to a podcast which was looking at the bonds between animals and humans, and it was making the point that if you go back to the Mongols, there was an intrinsic bond between the horses and man. If you look at Hannibal's army, which of course back in the ancient world invaded Rome, there was an intrinsic bond between the elephants and the soldiers as well. Do you still see that kind of bond, that intrinsic link between much of the local population and the elephants, or has that bond for whatever reason been broken or forgotten down the centuries?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting relationship between elephants and the people that share space and live very closely alongside them. It's not always a happy relationship, and that's a growing challenge that we're seeing across both Africa and Asia. The human population around the world is growing, and all of those people need more space to live, to grow food, to build schools and hospitals, roads, railways, things like that. And all of that sort of encroaches on the sort of natural landscapes in Africa and Asia. And that means that people are coming much more into close contact with elephants and other wildlife as well. And sometimes that can lead to problems. So we're seeing an increase in negative human-elephant interactions in both Africa and Asia. And what that might look like is elephants might move into a farmer's field and eat the farmer's crops. You can also see elephants and people and livestock coming together at water sources or important food resources. And there can be some conflict there, and that might be that elephants can injure or even kill people. And in retaliation, often people would injure and kill elephants. So it's a difficult relationship. It's something that there's a lot of effort and time going into at the moment. How can we make that work? How can we ensure coexistence between people and elephants? It's not just about building fences between people and elephants. It's about supporting people so that they can live alongside elephants. When an elephant does come into your field and eats your crop for the year, you know, that's your food, that's your income. That might be the ability to send your children to school. So it can be a really, really difficult situation for both people and elephants. And so managing that is important. That said, there's some really great examples of people living closely alongside elephants around the world. And many communities, local communities, have really special relationships with elephants and the wildlife that they live alongside, because for so long they've coexisted and they depend on the natural world for their livelihood and their living as well. So we do see really nice examples where elephants and people coexist.
And that leads quite well into our next question, actually. But I should say, first of all, that Vicky has a website that's really, really interesting. It not only has loads of information about her research, but also her fantastic wildlife arts and pictures that she's drawn. So I definitely recommend going to have a look at that. So me and Chris were having a look at that, and one of the articles that we saw that you published on there was about the behavioural implications of elephant vasectomies that leapt out to us a bit. But I guess that does link in terms of human and elephant kind of interaction and how you deal with that, and with are people looking to cull elephants sometimes, or they're doing vasectomies instead to try and control the numbers? Could you talk us through that article and kind of the implications of that?
Yeah, definitely. It's always a good conversation starter, that article. So yeah, but it's an important one, and it does, just like you say, draw on what we've just been talking about. So contrary to popular understanding of elephants, actually in some parts of Africa, elephant numbers are growing. One example is in South Africa. elephant numbers have been growing, and that's because they're quite well protected. A lot of the populations in South Africa are confined to very small fenced reserves. And what we see is that when elephant populations grow in these small reserves and they increase in density, we see that they are causing these changes to the habitat that we talked about earlier. So they're converting woodland to grassland, and that can have impacts on other species that they're sharing that reserve with, and people's understanding of what's going on in the ecosystem. And in other places, we are seeing this rise in human-elephant conflict, these negative interactions. And again, that might be another reason why we start thinking about how we can manage the number of elephants in certain places. And historically, what we've seen in places like the Kruger National Park in South Africa, when the elephant population there grew to what was considered too many elephants, they would cull those elephants. So, right through from the 1950s up until the 1990s, elephants were culled quite regularly. And what that means is staff that work for the national parks would go out and kill a number of elephants to reduce the number of elephants that were living there. But obviously, that's not a particularly pleasant thing to do. It's not good for the elephants. The elephants that remain also can be quite disturbed by what's gone on. It's also, from a human perspective, it doesn't feel like what we want to be doing, especially when in other places elephants are struggling, elephant numbers are declining. So in the 1990s, there was a sort of shift. How can we start thinking about non-lethal approaches to managing the number of elephants? And one thing that happened was an increase in the number of translocations, and that means moving elephants from a place where there might be too many to somewhere that doesn't have so many elephants, or would like to reintroduce elephants or bolster the population that they've got there. So we saw lots of elephants being moved around South Africa particularly, but also further afield as well. But the problem now is that we've seen lots of those translocations and lots of those recipient reserves now also facing the same problem. They also now feel that they've got enough or maybe even too many elephants. So, but because there's nowhere else to move them, the question now is, how do we deal with that? And so one idea is, rather than reducing the number of elephants, is to slow down the increase in elephants, so slow the birth rates. And one way to do that is through contraception. Some of those are hormonal, a bit like in humans, where we use hormonal birth control to reduce birth rates. It's a similar idea in elephants, so there can be hormonal controls. But the concern with some of those hormonal controls is that we see changes in elephant behaviour because of those changes in hormones. So in male elephants that are treated with hormones, we see that they become less dominant, especially the older bulls, which we rely on the older bulls for being dominant individuals to manage everybody else, to keep everyone else in line. So when we're using hormonal contraceptives, we might lose some of that, and that's of concern. So the alternative that actually Disney Corporation came up with, so just like the Disney movies, Disney also have a conservation fund and a team of vets. They came up with the idea of vasectomizing elephants. So it's actually elephant testicles don't hang out like we see in lots of other species. They're actually tucked up behind the elephant's hips inside the body. So it's a keyhole surgery, and the vets would go in, use keyhole techniques to snip a little section out of the tube that takes the sperm out of the testes, and vasectomize them that way. And the theory of the vasectomies over the hormonal treatment is that because everything is still left intact, other than that little snip you've taken out, all the hormones should stay the same, and we should see normal behaviour in those male elephants. So that paper was really looking at, is that the case? Is that true? Do we see that those normal behaviours are maintained, especially those dominance hierarchies that we see in male elephants? So the oldest individuals should be the most dominant, and they should manage the behaviour of the younger bulls, and that's really important. And so that paper was really looking at that. We studied a group of elephants in South Africa. 7 adult males had all been vasectomized. We were following them. They had been followed for a period of 10 years. I had been involved in some of that. We wanted to see if they were doing what we thought they should be doing, what would be normal. And our conclusion was that yes, they are behaving normally. That dominance hierarchy is maintained. They're still interested in the ladies. They're still acting just as they should to make babies and to continue growing the population. But obviously, they're sort of firing blanks at that point. So we see that the birth rate also then dropped as well. That was the goal of the vasectomies. And just knowing that the behaviour is maintained means that vasectomies can be a viable, non-lethal alternative that maintains elephant behaviour in some of these places where we're seeing difficulties between the number of elephants and the people living alongside.
And I thought this would be a bit of a tricky follow-up, but one thing I'm just quite curious about, how do you select which elephants are going to have the vasectomy? Do you generally go for the older elephants, or do you try and get a broad range across different age groups? And then secondly, do you think because of the success of this, we're going to see vasectomies replace hormonal treatments across the board?
So that's a really good question. So what the reserve that I was studying these vasectomized elephants in that case, what they did was they wanted to treat all of the adult males. So in elephants, they become sexually mature in their teenage years, sort of around 15, but they don't actually start fathering offspring until they're much older. And that's because we see this dominance hierarchy. So it's the oldest male gets the best access to all the females. He should be preventing the younger males access to those females as well. So although they could be siring offspring, they often don't until they're much older and bigger and more attractive for the ladies. But what we wanted to do was all of the adult breeding age bulls. And in that case, it was 9 individuals. So 7 of those 9 were vasectomized. The problem with 2 of them was that they were actually too old. So there was a worry that, putting them under anaesthetic was a worry. That's a concern. So the elephants are treated, they're vasectomized in the field, but they have to be put to sleep to do that. So they're anaesthetized whilst that procedure is carried out. And there was a concern over the anaesthetic for those 2 older bulls. And one of them actually was attempted, but the keyhole surgery equipment, so you have a very long piece of equipment that is inserted in to find the right pipe, to cut the right pipe. And one of the individuals, he was too big. That piece of equipment wasn't long enough to get in to reach the duct, the vas deferens, or the pipe that needed to be cut. So it was unsuccessful in treating him. So it was this slightly younger but still adult bulls that were treated with vasectomies. The 2 oldest bulls, the 2 most dominant bulls, were subsequently, they used the hormonal treatment on those 2 instead. And actually, we did see that their behaviour did change as a result of that. So it was an interesting comparison to do. And in answer to your second question about whether, because of the success of this, we're likely to see it happening elsewhere, one of the challenges is funding with these things. So it costs quite a lot of money to go out, to find an elephant, to dart the elephant, to put them to sleep, and then to carry out the surgery. So funding is a bit of a limiting factor. So I don't think it will be happening left, right and centre. And also some people don't like the idea of interfering with elephants in such a way either. And it's also a long-term solution. You're not immediately reducing the number of elephants. It's a slowing of the growth of the population of elephants. So sometimes that's not quick enough for some people's goals, I guess, would be the way to say that. But what it has done is, the difference between the hormonal treatment and the vasectomies, it has changed some policy in South Africa. So now it's actually not the hormonal treatment that those 2 older bulls were being treated with. That's now not actually recommended, because it is changing the behaviour of those elephants. So although we might not be seeing vasectomies left, right and centre, and that's probably a good thing, we do still want growing populations of elephants in some places. What it does mean is that it's informing how we do choose to manage those elephants as well. So it's an option and a better option than some of those hormonal treatments.
just to go and shift the conversation slightly, and I feel you're going to have a ton of follow-ups after this. But as climate change causes more extreme weather conditions around the world, how is this endangering different animal species, and what can meteorologists do to help guide anticipatory action in conservation?
Yeah, so we can swing now to talk about climate change. That's good. So obviously everyone's quite aware of climate change. We're seeing rise in global temperatures, changes in seasonal patterns. The ocean sea levels are rising and it's acidifying as well, the water in the oceans. And we're seeing, ice caps melting, and all of that has an impact on biodiversity. But it's not just those sort of gradual long-term changes that are impacting biodiversity. We're also seeing, as you say, an increase in the number, but also the severity of these extreme weather events around the world. So that's things like flooding, cyclones, droughts, heat waves, cold waves. All these things are being intensified because of climate change. And those extreme events can act to have an impact on biodiversity at much more immediate timescales. So, we're not talking hundreds of years into the future. We're talking any day we could have a drought or a flood or a cyclone, which could have an impact on species and on biodiversity. The one thing with that's maybe slightly promising is that meteorologists have come a very long way, and now a lot of these extreme weather events are forecastable. We can anticipate them. We have weather forecasts at reasonable time frames. That means we know often when a flood is coming or likely, and we know when droughts are coming. And what that means is that if we have that sort of early warning, we have an opportunity to take action to reduce the impacts of those extreme weather events. And every day we look at the weather forecast. Do I need to take a coat to work today? Is the question we all look at the weather for, or will the wedding I'm going to at the weekend be beautiful weather or not? So we're using that every day to think about our actions. And you can think about extreme weather events from our side. We have these Met Office yellow or amber weather warnings when there's going to be snow or very heavy winds and things that we need to be aware of and take action to avoid any potential negative impacts. So we're using weather warnings all the time, but in the conservation sector, there hasn't really been a huge uptake yet of using that weather and climate forecast information to make decisions before these extreme events occur. I've just started a new project which is trying to improve the use of weather forecasting in conservation action and planning. So can we use weather forecasts to anticipate? In my case, we're looking at drought in Kenya, and when we know drought's coming, what that might mean for elephants. So can we take action to, preserve elephants in times of drought? And I think the way that we're going to have to do that, because there's some difficulties, there's differences between conservation and meteorology, is just very simply in terms of the language that's used. So there's some barriers to overcome there. But I think bringing together sort of weather forecasters and experts in forecasting and meteorology together with conservation practitioners, the people that are actively working on the ground to preserve biodiversity, bringing them together for some discussions is a really good starting point. So that's what I'm hoping to do in my project over the next couple of years. But I think more broadly, we need to start to see these sort of interdisciplinary collaborations between meteorology and conservation. I think there's huge scope there to start using weather forecasts to protect biodiversity.
Fantastic. And I was reading about that area of your research on one of your blogs, and I like the way you explained it in terms of when there's a terrible weather event, and then there's work for the humanitarian crisis and raise money for aid and things like that. But this is what you're talking about, is a way of seeing the things before they happen in the forecast and try and preempt things or make it limit the impact of those so that it's not as bad as those things happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And actually the humanitarian sector is a really good comparison. So they're dealing with the impacts of extreme weather as well. And the traditional humanitarian model, we've all seen those emergency appeals after an extreme event, earthquakes and hurricanes and flooding. Those responsive actions, I guess. So an extreme weather event hits, and then there's an emergency appeal, and then action is taken for recovery and rebuilding after those events. But the humanitarian sector have recognised that, and they recognise that actually we could reduce the impacts of those extreme events if we start using weather forecasts to take action before those extreme events are hitting. So an example would be, we know of floods coming. You have a warning, there's going to be very heavy rainfall, so flooding is very likely. Rather than you wait until the flood hits, people are, stranded, their houses are flooded, there's quite likely injury and possibly death of people in those instances. Let's take action before. We know the heavy rain's coming. Based on that warning, let's evacuate people. Let's get people out of there, get them somewhere safe. So then at least, yes, homes may still be flooded, but the injuries and deaths would be much reduced. And in that way, you're not just reducing the impacts of that extreme weather event, but you're also saving money, because often if you're taking action before, there's less impacts, so there's less money needed to recover from those impacts. But also there's cost saving efficiencies in taking action in advance and not sort of this scramble for action after an extreme event or a disaster has happened. The humanitarian sector is guiding the way, and what I hope we can do is bring some of those ideas from the humanitarian sector into conservation now and see where we can take that.
I think that's fantastic that that's being looked at, and I was also interested in the actual process of. I have this kind of like movie version view of it, of where you get this data, you jump in an RV or a Land Rover, you drive off into the outback or whatever, and you go and sort things out instantly. What's the actual process? Are you analysing the meteorological data yourself, and then the longer process to then contact different people and to put in measures? Is this kind of weeks in advance, or is it sometimes only a few days before you know?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. So it's not quite as dramatic maybe as you might have pictured, but what I'd say, first of all, they said it's a huge collaborative effort. So it's not just the meteorologist making a forecast and triggering action. It's meteorologists developing these forecasts over many years so that they're good enough to give us enough warning, then working with humanitarian actors. What information do they need and how soon do they need it? And then the humanitarian actors work with groups on the ground that would then take that action. They would take the money after the forecast has indicated that a disaster is coming, and then implement the actions that would be useful. So it's a huge collaborative effort, and these early warning, early action systems can take quite a long time to develop. So they can be a couple of years in the making sure you've got the right forecast, you know the trigger thresholds, when we're going to take action, when we're not, you know what actions you're going to take, and you know who's responsible for them. That process of coming up with that action plan can be years in the making. But once it's developed and once it's operational, the idea is that it's there and it's ready to go. And in terms of how long we have in advance of these extreme events, it really depends on the event we're talking about. So if you think about flooding and the heavy rainfall that leads to flooding, we might have only a couple of days of advanced warning on that. So it does have to be a very quick decision. We're going to take action on this forecast and we're going to do it now. So you have a very short time in which to do that. And other things like drought, for example, we call it a slow onset disaster. So it's because of a lack of rainfall over quite a long period of time that you experience drought conditions. So in those instances, we can have a lot longer to take action, but it also means that there's less certainty because you have that longer time. There's also less certainty that a drought is or isn't going to evolve. So there's lots of things to consider there, and really the way that has happened and we've overcome that, or we've seen that overcome in the humanitarian sector, is through just collaboration and iterating back and forth between forecasting experts and humanitarian actors, and who needs what we can give, what we can't give, and working together to come up with a solution there. So collaboration has definitely been key.
And we do have our most important question remaining, but before then, Phil, if you've got any final questions.
Yeah, I think I only had one really. Is that on your website there's sort of a picture of you, a selfie with an elephant in the background, and that did convey to me the sense of being so close to an elephant. Sometimes with wildlife photography, you see this incredible wildlife and you think, oh, that's amazing, but you don't have that kind of connection of, wow, what if I was actually next to that animal? Somehow I thought I got a bit more of a sense of that. So I just wanted to ask you what it's like to be close to an elephant. Is it something that you can't describe and you have to just experience it to know what it's like?
It's pretty special. Yeah, I'll probably do a terrible job now of describing what it feels like, but it's very special. They're all individuals. Every single elephant is an individual, and the more time you spend with them, the more you realise that. And I think I know the photo you're referring to. That individual is a little bit notorious for enjoying a chase of a vehicle every so often. So we have been chased by that guy before. They are all individuals, and sometimes you're stood close to an elephant like that. You might even be 150 meters away and you're very, very nervous because you know who it is. Or, there's other individuals that are much more relaxed and you can be much closer to, and you can feel very much more at ease. But I think generally just being around them, and they are individuals and they are so they are intelligent. And it's not just you being close to them and watching and understanding them. I think often they're also doing exactly the same to you. They're checking you out and they're sussing, why are you here and what are you doing? And do I trust you or not? Just like we do with them, they're doing exactly the same to us. And there is a very, very special connection when you get to know them as individuals. It's very special to spend any amount of time with them. And hard to describe, but yeah, once you've spent any sort of time with them, that you're absolutely hooked is what I'd say.
Amazing. And I think this links us on to our concluder, the most important question of all. Vicky, what is your favorite elephant and why? Maybe you could list several contenders and then reveal your number one.
There's lots of contenders because, as I say, they're all individual, they're all unique, and even those ones that you feel quite nervous around and might keep you on your toes, that's just them, that's just their personalities, and you love them equally. But if I had to choose a favourite, there is an elephant called Shaisa, which is in Zulu, it means to come in with a bang, is what Shaisa means, which is a cool name, but I'm not sure it really represents him that well because he's a complete gentleman. He's one of our vasectomized elephants, so he was treated with a vasectomy, and one of our study individuals. And I remember the first year that I went out to South Africa to study them, he was always one of the ones that you could feel quite relaxed around. And we were on foot one day in a camp. So there was a fence between us and the elephants that were outside of camp. But he came right up to the fence and was feeding on a tree there. And we were maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 meters apart from this elephant. And he was completely relaxed in our presence. And I don't think I was quite as relaxed because it was my first time being so close to an elephant. With only a very thin wire fence in between us, but just spending time with him, with Shaisa, in that situation was really special. And since then, I always think of Shaisa saving the day. So you can have a really tough day out in the field. Maybe you've been looking all day and you haven't found any elephants, or you've been doing habitat surveys all day in the African heat. You're covered in bruises and cuts and grazes and insects in places you don't want them, and you're tired and done by the end of the day. And then Shaisa just shows up at the end of the day, always. He's always there to pick up the mood at the end of a very tough, long day. And yeah, always very calm, always very Shaisa, I guess. But he absolutely my favourite. So I've known him now for 8 years. An absolute gentleman would be the way to describe him. And just lovely to spend time around.
Okay, cracking stuff. I can't think of a better way to end the podcast than that. So it just remains from both myself and Phil to say thank you so much, Vicky, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been always good fun to talk about elephants. Always happy.
All right, that was a fascinating conversation. Suffice to say that Phil and I really did enjoy that. Vicky was an absolutely and utterly brilliant guest. And if you haven't had your share of elephants, you'll be happy to know that a link to Vicky's website is included in the episode description. On top of that, Vicky will be doing a Christmas lecture, predominantly to children, but I can imagine there might be a fair few interested parents listening in on that as well. And I thought, audience, we would leave you with a question. So the question is this: humans might be the smartest creatures, but are elephants the wisest? Goodbye.